I'm Hanan Rubinstein. I'm a musician, producer, engineer. You're here in my studio, Daxit Sound Studios in Fort Lee, New Jersey. My main instruments are guitar and voice. I'm also a vocal coach, but as a sideman, it was either guitar or so I play some auxiliary keys as well. You know, if I don't do one of them long enough, I start missing that thing. You know, my fingers either miss faders or the keyboards or the strings. You know, it really is a delicate balance. I mean, I feel like all of us nowadays do so many things. It's hard to be just a guitarist or a drummer, or, you know, you kind of have to adapt. But I find that it makes me a more complete musician because I have a grasp on a much wider scope of how music gets made and where it ends up in. So I love mixing, I love recording, I love writing, I love producing. And they do complement one another. I find that I also play now the way I produce. So whereas in the past I used to focus on, you know, what's the coolest guitar lick, what's the most exciting thing per se. Now I really worry about parts and locking into something that I feel serves the song more. And then, you know, as a producer, I look at colors. So having stood on stage with a lot of different people, I've been really fortunate to play with a lot of my favorite, most amazing drummers, you know, from like Brian Fraser Moore to Mike Reed to Derek Wright. You know, it's a long list of amazing musicians, and on a gut level, knowing what a snare drum feels like when you stand next to Steve Jordan, you know, like knowing what that feels like, it really helps me try to get that sensation out of the speakers because I've spent time on stages and in live rooms and studios with musicians that I really respect and have learned a lot from. As a performer, I worked with Alicia Keys for a long time, about a decade, and aside from Alicia, I played with Ed Sheeran, Charlie Puth. Through Alicia, I got to work with all kinds of other artists too, like Bonnie Raitt, Carole King, Pharrell. It's been a really long road, and I'm very fortunate to have been part of that camp. The greatest gig, that was for sure Madison Square Garden. As a kid growing up in New York City, of course, you always wanted to play the mecca that is Madison Square Garden, and you know, having to have my own moment. We actually played a song with Maxwell during that show where I got to kind of walk into the front of the catwalk, and you know, Alicia and Maxwell went backstage, and I literally had Madison Square Garden to myself, which was nice, especially, you know, with my parents in the audience. That was kind of a full circle moment. It's funny, I did go to school. I went to Purchase Conservatory. It was amazing. I majored in studio composition, which was kind of half technical and half horn arranging, string arranging, you know, getting sessions happening basically. But I gotta tell you, I was an intern in the beginning at Unique Recording Studios in Manhattan. And I ended up, you know, becoming an assistant, an engineer, and so on and so forth. But as an intern there specifically, just buying coffee and cigarettes and, you know, shoveling dirt basically, I learned so much by just watching people and doing their patches whenever they would let me in the room. And I miss it. I miss having a scene where you had all these different studios. And like now, you know, I'm blessed. I have this beautiful place, but there's something that I miss about working in a giant facility that has a B room and a C room and a D room and an E room, and just like kind of peeking your head into different rooms and seeing who's there and meeting new people at the lounges and, you know, bumping into folks. Now it's just whoever's working with me is here and that's it. In my world now that I'm doing so much TV and film, clarity is a huge deal because our timelines are usually so congested with so many things. We have to get so many performances down and so many mixes out the door just because we have to stick to the movie or the show schedule. I don't have time to second guess things. I don't have time to go to my car. I need to just hear it one time, know this is it. I know I need to record it, know that there's no better way to do it. And the Antelope audio stuff, like the Pure 2 specifically, it's just so accurate and so good. When I used other interfaces before, I felt like I was fighting the rig, if that makes any sense. Like when I have, especially as the music grows, when you're doing soundtracks or when you have a lot of instruments, it's almost like the parking spots get smaller. And I felt like the clearer the interface was, the better decisions I made and the faster I worked and the more I maintained my workflow, because I wasn't fighting the music, I wasn't fighting the digital world to make it sound like something that's real. It just sounds like what it is. You know, I found myself using other interfaces, which were all very good, but I found myself using a lot more plugins because I had to make the audio almost like a contortionist, you know, like a little bit of lows here and mids or whatever, just kind of make it sound like what's coming back at me is true to what I heard in the room. Whereas with the Antelope stuff, specifically with the Pure 2 and the 10MX clocking it, you just point the mic, you listen to the audio, you know, the analog audio that's coming out the room, and I A/B it with what's coming back post conversion. It's virtually indistinguishable. I mean, it's so good, and I'll argue that sometimes there's a digital quality this sounds crazy, but it's almost more pleasant somehow, maybe because we're used to hearing digital audio at this point, but there's something that feels, I hate using this word, but it feels almost slightly more finished, if that makes any sense. I initially discovered Antelope because of their clocking. I had a different interface, and someone said, hey man, you know, if you just get this it was the 10M back then, it was before the 10MX, if you just get this 10M and the Trinity or whatever, and you hook those up to your interface, it's gonna get a lot better. You know, the old cliche of putting the gray screen and taking it off your speakers. So we ran through the whole conversation. I said, sure, I'll try it. It's a little expensive, but I'll try it. Full disclosure, I thought it's just the way you divide your samples, how much of an effect could that have on of the audio? It's ones and zeros. And sure enough, I put the Antelope clock on my old converter, just with word clock, and it was shocking. I mean, the difference was not subtle. And then I saw that they're making interfaces, and I got to look at the Orions, and I couldn't believe that they could get 32 IOs in a single rack space. I mean, that's crazy. So then I thought, well, surely something must be wrong with the audio. They can't really compete with the other brands that are 3 times as expensive. So I had to hear it, heard it, couldn't believe it, bought it, and been happy ever since. I haven't replaced it. It's still sitting in my rack, the first generation Orion with a 10MX. Sounds amazing. If you're doing something that doesn't sound right and these are your interfaces, the problem is not the interfaces. They're just that good. And yes, you can have other brands that maybe color the sound more or give you different shades, if you will. But I think in terms of clarity and translation and accuracy, stuff is amazing. It's second to none. I love these distressors over there. In fact, I had more of them, but we had to make more room for other things. But we succumbed to only having 4. They're incredible. They're truly the Swiss Army knife. I mean, you can make them sound just like an 1176. LA2A, whatever. They more than just behave like the units, they actually sound like some of the units. Not a lot of people know that as you change the ratios on the distressors, you actually go through different circuitries. It's not just different ratios, and I use them all the time. Another thing that's cool about the Antelope audio, since we're talking about other gear, is because the conversion is so accurate and so clean, I have no fear of doing hardware inserts, even if I'm working in the box. So I'll use a lot of this outboard gear that I have, even if I'm mixing in the box, and I'll end up printing it ultimately, but I don't feel like I have to work on the sometimes I put things, you know, on the SSL, but it's amazing how good the conversion is, and I get to use all my gear, like my reverbs and, you know, compressors, EQs. I truly have no fear when I'm working with Antelope, because it sounds just like the real thing. Hi, I'm Hanan Rubinstein. Check out Antelope Audio at AmericanMusical.com.